Tamsin Hale stepped between the rifles and shoved the barrel off Jonah's heart. Cold iron scraped her coat buttons as she drove the muzzle sideways, planting her boots in the churned, bloody snow. "You shoot past me, Cole Thatcher, and you better believe I'll haunt you first," she said. The wind carried the gunpowder sting of the last shot, and with it the steady, awful awareness that if she misjudged this moment, White Elk Valley would finish the winter with one less rancher and a lot more graves. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Cole Thatcher's knuckles whitened around the stock of his Winchester. The barrel still angled just enough that if he twitched wrong, she'd feel the shot tear through her spine on its way to Jonah. His chest rose and fell hard beneath his sheepskin coat, breath a white ghost between his teeth as he glared past her shoulder. On the other side, Jonah Maddox hadn't moved since the bullet grazed his arm and took his hat clean off, but Tamsin could feel the weight of his stare like another gun trained on the back of her skull. Men ringed them in a ragged circle, both outfits mixed at the edges, Maddox riders in dust-stiff coats and black scarves, Thatcher hands with their brown felt hats and red bandanas, every one of them taut as fence wire in a storm, waiting to see whose boss she'd fail first. Tamsin tasted iron where she'd bitten her tongue, forcing herself not to swallow, not to show the hurt. Fear had its own smell. She'd learned that in a war hospital where boys screamed for mothers who'd never arrive, and right now it rolled off these men like heat from a branding fire. Fine, she thought. Let them see mine and mistake it for anger. Lower the rifle, she said to Cole, keeping her voice flat, like she wasn't standing between 10 winters of bad blood armed with nothing but a stubborn streak and a warn. Bible shoved down in her saddlebag. "Both of you, now." Cole's jaw flexed. From this close she could see the faint white line that cut through the dark stubble on his cheek. A scar, she'd heard, came from a broken bottle in a saloon fight that started over water rights and ended with 2 men dead on the floor. "Get out of the way, Miss Hale," he said, polite on the surface, contempt coiled beneath. "This doesn't concern you," Jonah snorted softly behind her, a sound like a mule objecting to the harness. "It concerns her if you aim a gun where she stands, Thatcher," he said. "Drop it." They'd both come when she sent word that morning, which meant somewhere under all that stubbornness they still believed in something besides killing. Or maybe, she thought, they just didn't want the other man to hear what she had to say first. Either way here, they were on the narrow shelf of ground above the frozen creek, the valley opening below like a white-lipped wound, and the first thing they'd done was reach for guns the minute their boots hit the same patch of earth. Tamsin wondered, with a flicker of dark humor, if she'd misjudged the wisdom of offering to stand between them. 10 years, she said, letting the number hang, hoping the weight of it would fall heavier than the rifles. 10 winters you've been at this. You really want to make it 11 with only one brand left standing? Cole's eyes flicked to her, sharp blue chips in a weathered face. Behind her she felt Jonah shift, boot creaking in the packed snow. The men at the edge of the circle traded glances, the story of those 10 winters written in the twisted set of their mouths, and the way their fingers rode close to their holsters. She hadn't been here for most of it. Tamsin arrived at White Elk Valley 3 springs ago, when the land still looked like a promise instead of a ledger line under a banker's thumb. She'd bought the old Miller homestead that sat on the rise between the Maddox and Thatcher, spreads the only strip of land that touched both their creek, rights, and consequently the only place they could meet without setting foot on each other's claims. Neutral ground, she decalled it back, then standing on the warped porch and squinting against the sun as Jonah and Cole each squatted in the dust, palms pressed flat to the earth like they could feel their claim lines through their skin. They hadn't believed in neutral. They believed in fences, in surveyed markers, in the barrel of a gun backing up a deed. Now their animals lay rib-sharp in the winter pastures, and the last hay was going to run out before the snow did. And if they didn't stop bleeding each other as herds dry, the valley would be nothing but bones come summer. Tamsin took a slow breath that cut cold all the way to her lungs. "If either of you dies today," she said, "you don't just lose a fight. You hand this valley straight to the men waiting outside it." One of the Thatcher hands shifted, snow crunching under his boot. And Tamsin saw it then, the track she'd noticed on the ride-up, threaded between the hoofprints of their own men. Heavy horseshoes, narrow set, the kind she'd seen on cavalry remounts back when the government sent patrols out from the fort. Whoever had ridden them had stayed just out of sight, shadowing both her and the men who followed, close enough to watch but not close enough to talk. There were more eyes on this meeting than the 30-odd men in front of her. Someone was banking on today's parley ending in gunfire. "Men waiting outside it," Jonah repeated, voice low. He understood. She heard it in the way his words scraped. "The bank," Cole said tightly. "Railroad. Hell, maybe the territorial governor himself, if he thinks there's a vote in it. And rustlers who don't care what brand S on a cow, so long as they can cut it free," Tamsin added. She tipped her chin toward the canyon mouth, where the trail led down toward the main road. "Tracks say we've got company already." For the first time since she'd stepped between them, both rifles dipped a fraction. Cole's gaze slid over the ridgeline, wary. Jonah's hand adjusted on his own rifle, not tightening, not loosening. "Put them down," she said again. "Last time I put a gun down with him in front of me, I buried my brother before the week was out," Cole answered. Tamsin heard the fracture in his voice and knew he'd regret it. The men would hear it as weakness, but to her ears it sounded like grief that had never found a grave deep enough. She didn't look back at Jonah. She didn't have to. She'd seen the way his jaw clenched when folks mentioned Eli Maddox's name, the way his gaze went distant over a card table when a certain fiddle tune started up, the way he changed chairs in the saloon so he didn't have to face the south wall where they dehung the chipped brass lamp. Ele had shot out by accident the night before that winter brawl at the river. "Your brother died because you both forgot the river didn't belong to either of you," she said quietly. "I remember him driving my cattle off my winter range," Jonah shot back. "Funny how we recall different parts." "Funny," Tamsin echoed, though there wasn't anything humorous in the way her heart beat hard against her ribs. "I remember burying 16-year-old Billy Jensen after the last stampede when your boys and yours." She swept her eyes over both of them, shot up each other's herds in the dark, and started a panic that trampled him into the mud. Silence fell, heavy and thick. Billy had been a town boy, worked at the livery, his mama scrubbing floors at the hotel for pennies. He'd been out there chasing strays for both outfits, and both sides had claimed him as theirs at the funeral. Neither had shown up to help his mother move when she left valley soil behind. Cole's rifle point sagged. Jonah exhaled slowly, breath rough as a rasp. "All right," Jonah said at last. "I'll lower mine if he does." Cole's mouth twitched. "You always were good at putting the other man in front, Maddox. And you were always good at filling the air with talk when it was time to act," Jonah replied. Tamsin's patience thinned, a fraying rope. She stepped closer to Cole, so near now she could see the flecks of snow stuck in his lashes. She'd stitched a bullet crease over his eyebrow once 2 winters back, when one of Jonah's boys had gotten jumpy and fired across the creek. She'd leaned over him in her kitchen, lamplight turning the blood on his temple black, his fingers twisting in the sheet as he tried not to curse with a lady's hands on him. He hadn't thanked her then. He'd just walked out with the same chip on his shoulder he'd brought in. "Listen to me, both of you," she said now. "I'm not your mama or your preacher or the judge you keep trying to buy in town, but I am the only one foolish enough to stand where I'm standing, and I am not walking away until these rifles are on the ground." She let her voice drop with the last words, put every tired, aching piece of herself into them. She was tired of blood, tired of boys' bodies going cold under her hands, tired of watching men who knew better choose pride over peace. Cole stared at her. Something shifted in his eyes, anger sliding sideways into something more complicated. "Jonah," he said, gaze never leaving her face, "on 3. Or do you plan on telling folks you were too scared to lower a gun in front of a woman? You couldn't count to 3 without a foreman doing it for you, Jonah answered. It was almost banter, the old rhythm of insults they traded over poker tables when the feud cooled, just enough that they could sit in the same room without drawing steel. 1, Tamsin said, before they could spin it into more old grievances. 2. She didn't realize she'd braced herself until both rifles hit the snow at once. The thud echoed in the hollow space below her ribs. Around them, the ring of men seemed to exhale as one. Hands slid off holsters, shoulders dropped an inch. It wasn't peace, not yet. But it was the first time in years both Jonah and Cole had stood within arm's reach of each other, without a weapon between them. And Tamsin let herself feel for one bare breath the dizzy relief of that. Good, she said softly. Now we're going to my place. Cole's brows drew together. We came where you asked, he said. You said neutral ground. She nodded toward the squat shape of her homestead further up the slope, smoke just beginning to curl from its chimney where she'd banked the fire high before leaving. This is neutral, she agreed. But I am not freezing my toes off while you two rehash every old sin in front of an audience. We talk at my table. Just the 3 of us. Murmurs whipped through the men again. You expecting us to leave our outfits standing out here with no word? Jonah asked. You expect me to tuck myself at your kitchen like some Sunday caller? Cole added. Tamsin folded her arms. I expect you to act like men who claim to love this valley, she said. If you can't sit across from each other long enough to listen, then maybe you're not worth the land you're killing each other over. It was a low blow, and she knew it. She saw it land in the stiff lines of their faces. Jonah's gaze flicked toward his foreman, a grizzled man named Wyatt, whose loyalty rode thicker than blood. Cole glanced at his own second, lanky Ezra Pike with his easy grin gone flat as a turned-down lamp. Wyatt, you're in charge, Jonah said. Nobody fires unless fired upon, and if any man decides he knows better, he can hand me his pay and find another spread. Ezra touched the brim of his hat. You heard him, he told the Thatcher boys. Keep your horses saddled and your mouths shut. We ain't the ones asked to talk today. Tamsin waited while Jonah and Cole unbuckled their gun belts and handed them to their foreman. Only when their holsters hung empty and their men had stepped back did she turn uphill toward her cabin. Snow crunched beneath her boots, the sound familiar now, almost comforting. She de-walked this path in every season mud, sucking at her heels in spring dust, puffing up around her ankles in summer fallen leaves whispering, underfoot in autumn. But winter always made her most aware of the distance between the door and the rest of the world. Winter made every step matter. She felt the weight of the 2 men behind her, the way their presence pulled at the air. If someone were going to take a shot, this would be the moment. Backs turned, weapons surrendered. The thought made the hairs rise on the back of her neck. She scanned the ridgeline out of habit, eyes tracing every dip where a man could hunker down, every scrub pine that might hide a horse. Nothing moved but a magpie hopping branch to branch, its feathers a slash of black and white against the gray sky. Still, she couldn't shake the sense of being watched. They won't like it, Jonah said behind her, his voice pitched low enough that only she and Cole would hear. The men. U.S. going in without them. They like burying friends less, Tamsin replied. If they have any sense, they'll see it for the blessing it is to step out of the line of fire for an afternoon. She didn't say what else she was thinking, that if today went wrong, if the valley erupted again, it might be a blessing for her too. To be inside walls, she knew, with men whose tempers, at least she had learned to read. Her cabin wasn't much. Whitewashed boards, patched roof, small porch with a crooked rail Jonah's men had put up as an apology after one of their brawls knocked her old one clean off. Inside, though, it was hers in a way nothing else had been since she left the red clay of Missouri behind. Shelves lined with jars she'd canned herself, books stacked 3 deep on the table, a quilt of mismatched squares thrown over the single narrow bed in the corner. A pot hung over the hearth, steam collecting on its lid. She'd been up before dawn chopping onions until her eyes burned and browning what little beef she had left, stretching it with beans and potatoes so there would be enough to feed 3 stubborn men who'd forgotten what it meant to share anything. She pushed open the door, and the smell of stew wrapped around her like an embrace. For a heartbeat she saw it as a stranger might. Small, worn, the sort of place a woman made when she didn't plan on needing anything from anyone. Then Jonah's bulk filled the doorway behind her, shouldering off his coat, and Cole stepped in after, stamping snow from his boots, and the space shrank, the air thickening with more than steam. "Sit," she said, pointing to the table. It had belonged to the Millers once, scarred with knife marks from a dozen Christmas turkeys, and the time old Mr. Miller had carved his initials in it drunk, laughing, while his wife hollered. She'd sanded it down when she moved in, but left the deepest cuts. Some history, she'd decided, deserved to stay. Jonah chose the chair with his back to the wall, eyes on the door. Of course he did. Cole hesitated, then dropped into the chair opposite, jaw set. Tamsin ladled stew into bowls, the spoon clinking against the pot. Her hands shook more than she liked, so she focused on the simple rhythm of it. Dip, pour, like medication doses measured out in the field hospital, each spoonful a small act of defiance against the chaos beyond the tent flaps. When she set the bowls down, both men stared at the food as if it might explode. "You look like I've served you dynamite," she said. "Eat. I'm not hungry," Cole muttered, which was a lie. She could hear his stomach growl from where she stood. Jonah just watched her, unreadable. "You'll think clearer if you don't have empty bellies gnawing at your sense," she said. "That's true of dogs, drunks, and ranchers, in my experience." One corner of Jonah's mouth twitched. She counted that as a victory. Reluctantly, as if agreeing to her stew meant conceding some invisible point, Cole picked up his spoon. Jonah followed suit. They ate in silence for a time, the only sounds the scrape of metal on crockery and the occasional pop from the fire. Tamsin leaned against the counter, bowl in her own hands, and let the warmth seep into her fingers. Her heart rate had slowed, but her mind hadn't. The tracks on the ridge nagged at her. She could picture exactly where they'd cut across the trail, a sharp, deliberate line. Someone had planned this day with care. She thought of the letters she'd received over the past month. 4 envelopes with no return address, each bearing the same tidy, unfamiliar hand. At first they'd been simple questions about grain prices, about snowfall averages, about the number of head each ranch ran. Then, more pointed, did she think Jonah Maddox would ever consider selling his north pasture? Did Cole Thatcher still carry the note from the bank in town, or had he found another lender? She'd burned the last letter in the stove without answering. The words had smelled like trouble as surely as smoke. Now, watching the 2 men bent over her table, scars and age and winter making them look older than they were, she wished she'd kept the letter as proof of what her gut already knew. Someone wanted this valley badly enough to study it from afar. Someone who understood that 2 proud men at each other's throats were easier to push off a cliff than 2 men standing side by side. "You didn't bring us here to feed us," Jonah said at last, breaking the quiet. "No," she admitted. "But you needed feeding. So that came first." He nodded once, as if that made a kind of sense he could respect. Cole wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, manners forgotten as his focus narrowed. "Then let's get to it," he said. "You said you had something to say that couldn't be shouted across the creek." Tamsin set her bowl down with care. The porcelain had a hairline cracked down one side. If you slammed it too hard, it would split. She knew her own seams weren't much stronger. "I do," she said. "But you won't like it." Cole's laugh was short, humorless. "Wouldn't be the first time you've told me something I didn't like. Miss Hale, get on with it." She crossed to the table and placed both hands flat on its surface, leaning in until she had their full attention. "You're being played," she said. "Both of you." The words hung between them. Cole's brows slammed together. Jonah's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. We've been at this since before you showed up, Hulla, Cole said slowly. Whatever game you're talking about, it started long before you bought that shack. She didn't flinch at the insult. This feud, yes, she said. But the way it's bled into every piece of your business these last years, the foreclosures, the missing stock, the way the bank keeps adjusting your notes, that's new. And it stinks of someone else pulling strings. Jonah's gaze sharpened. You accusing the bank outright? He asked. I'm saying the bank is a tool, she replied, like a gun. It matters whose hand it's in. She reached into the pocket of her skirt and pulled out the scrap she hadn't burned, the small corner of that last letter she'd kept without quite knowing why. The part where the writer had misjudged her, let curiosity slip into something like command. It would be best for all concerned if Mr. Maddox and Mr. Thatcher were not encouraged toward cooperation. Cooperation breeds consolidation, and consolidation complicates acquisition. She slid the scrap across the table. Jonah's eyes scanned it, jaw tightening. Cole read over his shoulder, then swore softly. Who sent this? He demanded. Does it matter? She countered. It matters if I'm going to ride to town and put a bullet in him, Cole said. Jonah shot him a warning look. We don't put bullets in letter writers, he said. We put them in the men who pay them, Tamsin swallowed. This hand, whoever it belongs to, has been pushing you toward exactly what you've done. Every time you undercut each other's cattle sales, every time you paid a rider to cut a fence or scared a buyer off the other's herd, you made it easier for someone else to step in and say, why don't I take that trouble off your hands? All they had to do was wait for you to tire yourselves out. She straightened, feeling the old ache in her lower back flare. Well, I'm tired, she said. Tired enough to say no more. Not in my valley. Cole rubbed a hand over his face. Dark circles smudged the skin under his eyes. He'd been riding nights, she knew, trying to keep rustlers from slipping stock through the north draw. Jonah stared into his bowl like it might hold an answer. Suppose you're right, Jonah said finally. Suppose there is some third snake in the grass, waiting for one of us to fall so he can swallow what's left. What's you stepping between our guns this morning going to change about that? Tamsin met his gaze. Everything, she said. Because I'm not asking you to shake hands and forget the past. I'm asking you to see who profits every time you bleed. She tapped the table between them. You keep each other poor, you both lose this valley. You find a way anyway to stop handing your enemies ammunition. You stand a chance of keeping your land and your men's lives. Cole's lip curled. You think I'm going to share range with him? He asked. I think you going to do whichever thing leaves your son with something besides debt. And a grudge to inherit. She snapped, the words out before she could soften them. His head snapped up. Color rose in his cheeks. You leave my boy out of this, he said. I can't, she replied. I've seen his boots outside my door too many mornings, asking if I have extra bread. If you drive this ranch into the ground trying to out stubborn Jonah Maddox, he'll be the one selling his saddle in 20 years to pay off your mistakes. Silence roared. Even the fires seemed to quiet, flames shrinking. Tamsin saw the hurt in Cole's eyes, the raw, protective fury. She didn't back down. She couldn't afford to. Behind his anger was fear, and behind that fear was the truth. His boy, Ben, was thin for his age, his shoulders too narrow. The winter had not been kind. Jonah cleared his throat. My nephew works your line shack up on the ridge, doesn't he, Cole? He asked. Cole's jaw jumped. Yeah, he said warily. Why? Because I found his tracks the other night where they shouldn't have been, Jonah said. Along with 4 others that didn't belong to my men or yours. He reached into his coat and tossed a small, twisted piece of metal onto the table. It clinked against the wood. Dropped from a horseshoe, government issue. Not from around here. Tamsin picked it up. The metal was cold, edges sharp. Same kind of shoe that left those prints on the trail, she murmured. She met Jonah's eyes. You didn't mention this before. I didn't have a woman waving letters under my nose hinting we had a common enemy before. he said dryly. Figured if it was rustlers, I'd catch them myself and be done with it. And keep the satisfaction of the bullet all to yourself, Cole said. Naturally, Jonah's gaze flicked to him. If I'd caught them, I'd have sent you word, he said after a beat. Even I know when a problem is too big for one herd. It was as close to an olive branch as Tamsin had ever heard him offer. Cole's expression shifted, some of the tightness draining. You ride my north pastures in the dark and don't think I notice? He asked. If I'd wanted to steal your cattle, you wouldn't have any left, Jonah replied. It was arrogant, but there was a thread of weary humor in it. Tamsin felt the air in the room changing, like the subtle drop in pressure before a storm. The lines between them were still there, etched by years, but something else was taking shape atop them, shared threat, if not yet shared purpose. She opened her mouth to press the advantage when a sound cracked through the cabin, a sharp, distant report that didn't belong to the familiar creaks of wood or sighs of wind. Gunfire. All three froze. That was from the ridge, Jonah said, already rising. Cole's chair scraped back, nearly tipping. Tamsin's heart lurched, slamming against her ribs. Another shot followed, closer this time, and then a third, the uneven rhythm of men firing in confusion. She was at the door before either of them, fingers fumbling at the latch. The cold hit her first, a slap that turned the sweat on her neck to ice. Then the scene resolved. Men scattered near the spot they'd gathered earlier, some diving for cover, others firing toward the tree line where puffs of smoke betrayed shooters tucked behind rocks and scrub. Horses screamed, rearing, their reins trailing. Wyatt shoved a young Maddox cowhand behind a boulder, firing over his head with grim precision. Ezra Pike knelt by one of the Thatcher boys who lay sprawled in the snow, crimson blooming beneath him like some terrible flower. Down, Jonah snarled, dragging her back into the doorway as a bullet whined past, splintering wood inches from her head. Her ears rang. Smoke prickled her nose. Cole cursed, reaching instinctively for a gun that wasn't at his hip. Who in hell? He began. Those cavalry shoes, Jonah said. Looks like the owner decided to stop watching and start acting. Tamsin pushed his arm away. You can't go out there unarmed, she said. Half your men will shoot you by mistaking this mess, thinking you're the other. They'll shoot at anything that moves if we don't take control, Jonah replied. He snatched the shotgun from the rack by her door, checking its barrels with a practiced flick. Cole's gaze landed on the old rifle mounted over her hearth, a relic of the previous owner. He grabbed it down without asking. Tamsin opened her mouth to object, then shut it. This was why she'd asked them here. Not to watch them die like fools, but to face, together, whatever had finally stepped out of the shadows. Don't you dare go charging out there and make my morning a waste, she snapped. You're going to move like men who've decided they value their hides. We'll take the root cellar path. Both men looked at her. She jerked her chin toward the back of the cabin. Miller built a tunnel from the cellar to the brush behind the house. Smuggling, most likely. I've used it to get sick calves inside without spooking them. It'll put us behind your men, where we can see the whole field. Cole blinked, then barked a short laugh. You've been hiding tunnels out here, and didn't think to mention it till now. You didn't ask, she shot back. She grabbed her medical satchel from its hook, slinging it over her shoulder. The leather was worn, the strap mended twice. Inside, bandages and carbolic rattled as she moved. She'd hoped, foolishly, they might stay there today. The root cellar greeted them with the smell of earth and stored potatoes. Tamsin lifted the lantern from its nail and lit it, the small flame pushing back the dark. She led the way toward the low opening at the back, where boards concealed the tunnel mouth. Watch your heads, she warned. Jonah, you first. Cole, you'll bring up the rear. If anyone gets foolish in between, you'll both have a chance to knock sense into him. The crawl was tight, the air close. Dirt brushed her shoulders, sifted into her hair. Behind her, Jonah's breath sounded steady, controlled. Cole muttered something about rabbits and foxholes. Tamsin felt the tunnel sloping up, the slight change in pressure telling her they were close to the exit. She doused the lantern before they reached it, not wanting to silhouette themselves against the light. They emerged into a stand of scrub and low pines, the branches breaking the wind and muffling the gunfire. From here, the whole shallow bowl of ground where the men had been standing lay below, and beyond that, the ridge where muzzle flashes winked like distant fireflies. There were more shooters up there than she'd thought, at least 8, maybe 10, their positions staggered for overlapping fields of fire. Professional, she realized with a chill. Not drunken cowboys or desperate rustlers. Men who knew how to lay an ambush. Wyatt! Jonah bellowed, choosing volume over stealth now that they were behind their own lines. The foreman's head snapped around. Relief flashed across his face when he saw his boss alive, followed by something like disorientation as he registered Cole at Jonah's shoulder and Tamsin between them. All 3 crouched together. "Hold your fire unless you have a clear shot," Jonah roared. "Anybody shoots a Thatcher and answers to me." Ezra, hearing that, cupped his hands to his mouth. "Same goes for Maddox men." He shouted, "You ain't got enough pay saved to buy that kind of mistake." The effect was immediate. The wild, panicked firing slowed, turned deliberate. Men took actual cover instead of standing exposed. Tamsin watched as one of the ambushers on the ridge rose to shift position, thinking, perhaps, that the lull meant his job was done. Cole's borrowed rifle barked. The figure jerked and tumbled, sliding down the slope in an ungainly roll. "Nice shot," Jonah said grudgingly. Cole's mouth curled. "I don't miss when it counts," he replied. "Shame about all the times you think it counts when it don't," Jonah muttered. Tamsin cut them both a sharp look. "This is not the moment," she said. "You two can measure rifles later. Right now you need to stop whoever's driving those men." As if the valley itself wanted to underline her words, a new sound split the air. A hollow boom, lower than gunfire, rolled across the snow. Tamsin's teeth rattled with it. A second followed, then a third. Smoke puffed up from the far end of the valley, near the narrow throat where the creek squeezed between 2 outcroppings of rock. Her stomach dropped. "Dynamite," Jonah said grimly. "On the dam," Cole added. "That old stone pile won't hold if they blow the supports." Tamsin squinted, trying to make out shapes through the haze. She saw figures moving near the dam, stick-like silhouettes bent to their work. If the dam went, the surge of icy water would roar straight down the creek bed, through the low ground where most of the Maddox winter pastures lay, then spill onto the flatter Thatcher meadows beyond. It would tear out fences, drown livestock, maybe sweep away any man unlucky enough to be caught trying to cross. "They want to wipe us both out," she whispered. "Wash the valley clean, then stroll in with fresh deeds and smiles." Jonah's face had gone pale beneath his beard. "My south barn's right in that path," he said. "Every bit of feed I've got left." "My bunkhouse," Cole said hoarsely. "Ben's in there." The mention of the boy's name seemed to shake him more than the thought of his own losses. He half rose, as if he could outpace a wall of water on foot. Tamsin grabbed his arm. "You'll never make it in time," she said. "You don't know that," he snarled. "I know physics," she shot back. "More importantly, I know you're no good to your son dead in a ditch." His eyes blazed. For a heartbeat, she thought he might hit her. Then the anger cracked, revealing something rawer. "If that dam goes and I'm sitting here safe, he'll never forgive me," he said. "I won't forgive me." "Then we don't let it go," she said, the words coming from somewhere deeper than fear or logic. She turned to Jonah. "You have any men close enough to the dam to intervene?" He shook his head, jaw clenched. "Nearest are at the South Line shack, half an hour away on a good day." "Telegraph?" she asked. "Cut it last month in the last big blow," he said. "Never got around to fixing it." Of course not, she thought. The valley had been too busy watching itself, not its vulnerabilities. Tamsin looked back toward the dam. One of the figures there straightened, a dark shape against the white. Even at this distance, She could see the self-satisfied way he placed his hands on his hips. He tipped his hat toward the valley as if acknowledging an audience. "They're not done," she said. "Those blasts were just to scare us." Jonah squinted. "Charges on the buttress," he said slowly, "not the main wall. If they were trying to bring the whole thing down, they'd have set them lower. So what are they doing?" Cole demanded. "Testing," Tamsin murmured. "Showing us what they can do if we don't fold." She drew a breath that tasted of cold and cordite and fear. "Or maybe sending a message we can't afford to ignore." Another boom rolled across the valley, closer this time. Tamsin's head snapped around. This one hadn't come from the dam. It had come from somewhere to their right, near the rocky spur above her own cabin. Snow sloughed off the cliff face in a powdery slide. A tree toppled, crashing down not 30 yards from her roof. "They're hemming us in," Jonah said. "Driving us where they want us. Like cattle," Cole said bitterly. He stared at Tamsin. "Well, Miss Hale, you dragged us to this party. What now?" Her heart hammered. Every instinct screamed at her to run to grab her saddlebags, her medical kit, and whatever food she could carry, and ride out of this valley became a grave. She'd come here to get away from war, not to plant herself in the middle of another battle. But then she saw Ben's thin face in her mind, and Billy Jensen's grave, and Eli Maddox's empty chair in the saloon, and the long line of men she'd watched bleed out on stretchers because nobody had been brave or foolish enough to step between opposing rifles sooner. She thought of the letters, of the unseen hand that had been rearranging their lives like game pieces. She heard her own voice before she quite decided to speak. "I won't let either of you die," she said quietly, not a boast. "A promise, reckless and enormous. You don't get to hand this valley to them as your last act. You are not dying here today if I have anything to say about it." Jonah's eyes met hers, something like respect flaring there. Cole let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, disbelief and wild hope tangled together. "And how do you plan on stopping bullets with that stubborn chin of yours?" he asked. "By making sure they have to aim at me first," she answered. She straightened, feeling her fear settle into something harder, denser. "If they want this valley, they have to face us standing together. And if they see the three of us walk out there shoulder to shoulder, maybe they think twice about how much blood they're willing to spill. Or maybe they just kill all three of us and call it a day," Jonah said. His tone wasn't mocking, just practical. "That's a risk I'm willing to take," she said. "Are you?" "Don't speak for me," Cole muttered. She turned on him. "You said you couldn't live with yourself if Ben died while you sat safe. Well, you can't live with yourself if you let every man who follows you walk into slaughter either. They need to see you willing to stand where the lead flies. Not at their backs, pushing. At their front." The truth of that hit him. She saw it in the way his shoulders squared. "You're a damn menace, Tamsin Hale," he said. "You know that?" "So I've been told," she replied. She looked between them, feeling the choice crystallize. "You can stay back here and keep trading potshots with men who are unafraid to blow a dam apart to make a point. Or you can walk with me into the open and show them this valley isn't as easy to take as they think." She held out her hands, one to each man. "I'm going either way." Jonah stared at her offered hand, then at the ridge, then back. For a moment she thought he'd refuse on principle, just to avoid giving Cole the satisfaction of being seen beside him. Then he clasped her wrist, his grip warm and solid. "Reckon I've followed worse ideas," he said. Cole hesitated half a heartbeat longer, then his rough palm closed around her other wrist. "Ben'll skin me if I let you die before he pays you back for all that bread," he said. "So I suppose I better make sure you live long enough to collect." Tamsin's throat tightened unexpectedly. She squeezed their hands, then released them. "All right then," she said. "We walk out together. Slow, hands where they can see them. We make it clear we know exactly what they're doing." "And if they don't care?" Jonah asked. "Then we make it as hard as hell for them," she said. She turned toward the slope that led down into the bowl, where gunfire still cracked sporadically. The path looked longer than ever. Every step, she knew, would take them further from safety and closer to whatever waited beyond those rifles. "You ready?" she asked without looking back. "No," Cole said honestly. "Good," she replied. "Means you're still thinking." She started down the slope, snow crunching under her boots, her shoulders squared. On either side of her, Jonah, Maddox, and Cole Thatcher fell into step. Behind them, their men watched, the murmur of their voices dying into a tense, expectant silence. Halfway down, someone on the ridge spotted them. The shooting faltered, then stopped altogether. An odd quiet settled over the valley, the kind that usually came before bad news. Tamsin could feel eyes on them from a dozen hidden positions, could feel the weight of decisions being made out of sight. Her heart thudded, but her stride didn't break. They reached the open ground, nothing between them and the rifles now but air and pride. Tamsin drew breath to call out to the men on the ridge, to force this unseen enemy into the courtesy of conversation, when a single shot cracked the silence. Snow jumped at her feet, spraying up in a stinging white halo. A warning. Or a line in the snow. Every head in the valley swung toward the rocky outcrop above the dam. A lone figure rode into view there, horse picking its way along the narrow ledge with the careful gait of an animal well used to danger. The rider sat straight in the saddle, cloak snapping in the wind, hat pulled low. Even at a distance, something about the set of that body screamed power accustomed to obedience. Tamsin narrowed her eyes, breath pluming in the cold. Whoever that was, they'd just stepped out of the shadows they'd relied on for 10 winters. They raised one hand slowly and snapped their fingers. At the sound, men rose from cover all along the ridge, rifles glinting. The rider pointed straight at Tamsin. "This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe." Now back to the story. Tamsin refused to blink as the rider's gloved finger leveled straight at her. The whole valley seemed to narrow to that line of aim ridge to saddle, saddle to her breastbone, as if one twitch could decide whose blood stained the snow next. On either side of her, Jonah and Cole stood like bookends, coats open, holsters empty, boots planted in the trampled white. Behind them, 24 Maddox and Thatcher hands held their breath and their tempers, rifles half raised toward the ridge. The rider curled his hand and beckoned. His voice drifted down a moment later, smooth and easy, like a man calling a stray dog instead of a woman standing between feuding ranchers and dynamite. "Step up where I can see you proper, Miss Hale." Hearing her name on a stranger's tongue knotted her gut. He knew her. She knew nothing of him, except the way his men had fired into her valley. Tamsin took 3 steps forward, boots squeaking faintly. Snow swirled around her skirt hem. The cold bit through wool and cotton and into the half-healed scars of winters past. She lifted her chin so her voice would carry. "You're the one with rifles on my ridge and powder on our dam," she called. "You climb down if you want to talk." A low laugh rolled out. "As bold as advertised," the rider said. "They told me you had a way of walking where bullets fly." I see they didn't lie. The word crawled under her skin. How many eyes had watched her without her knowing? He touched his hat brim, turned his horse, and started down the narrow switchback. The animal picked its way along the ledge like it had done this kind of thing before, careful, sure-footed, trained. Around him, the riflemen crouched in their nests of rock and brush, muzzles tracking the movement below. Tamsin heard Jonah's voice low at her shoulder. "You know this peacock?" "No," she murmured back. "But he's been studying us a long while." Cole's jaw flexed. "Feels like a banker," he muttered. "Or worse." The rider reached the valley floor at last and drew up 10 yards from her. Up close, he looked wrong for this stretch of country. His coat was cut fine, black cloth without a speck of trail dust, gloves soft kid instead of cracked leather. His hair shone with some kind of oil, slicked back from a narrow, handsome face. The only roughness on him was in his eyes, pale, flat gray, like creek ice over deep water. He swept his hat off and gave a shallow bow one city gentleman might practice in long mirrors, Lucian Harrow, he said. Continental and Frontier Development Company. At your service. The name hit the air like a thrown stone. Tamsin felt the flinch ripple through the men behind her. She didn't know the company, but Jonah's mouth flattened, and Cole's shoulders hitched as if someone had dropped a weight on them. You've heard of him, she said quietly. Bought half the grazing north of here, Jonah answered under his breath. Fenced it, plowed it, turned cowhands into deaf farmers. He holds the note on my south range, Cole added. His voice came out tight. Bank sold it on last spring. First I heard the name Harrow was stamped at the bottom. Lucian Harrow pretended not to hear. He studied Tamsin as if she were a new kind of stock animal he hadn't decided how to price yet. Miss Hale, he said. You've been lively correspondence of late. Tamsin's fingers curled around the scrap of letter in her apron pocket until the paper crinkled. She pulled it free and held it up, the careful eastern hand plain even at a distance. You sent these, she said. Questions about snow and grain and herd size. Warnings that cooperation in this valley would be unwise. A faint line appeared between his brows, there and gone. I send many letters, he replied lightly. Information is the lifeblood of progress. If men choose to use information foolishly, that is hardly my doing. You didn't just watch us bleed each other, Tamsin said. You salted the wound. Harrow's gaze slid past her, to the men in the rifles and the long scar of the dam above the creek. I did what any prudent investor would, he said. This valley is a seam of opportunity, water, grass, a low pass perfectly suited for a spur line. In 5 years, there will be a town here with a depot, mills, and more than one saloon. My company means to own that future. Your 10 winters of stubbornness are a temporary inconvenience. 10 winters, he said it like a weather report. Not 10 winters of boys trampled in stampedes and brothers buried on frozen ridges. If it's temporary, why bring guns? Tamsin asked. Why powder on the dam? He smiled. Because you, Miss Hale, have been threatening to make temporary things permanent, standing in the way. Speaking of we, when these gentlemen only understand us and them, his gloved hand indicated. Jonah and Cole, they've been at each other's throats for a decade, Harrow went on. All I needed was time for pride to chew through their savings. Notes come due. Cattle wander. Banks grow nervous. Then along you come, feeding their men, stitching their wounds, whispering notions of peace. Cooperation complicates acquisition. He said the phrase with neat satisfaction. Cold anger burned in Tamsin's chest. You lit their fuses and called it acquisition, she said. Billy Jensen died under hooves because your letters kept them shooting in the dark. Eli Maddox drowned in a creek he was trying to defend from men you started paying on the side. Don't talk to me about inconvenience. A flicker of annoyance passed through Harrow's eyes. You're very free with accusations, he said. Yet you sit in a sturdy little house warmed by stoves hauled in on roads my company helped fund. You travel to town on bridges built with my timber contracts. Progress has touched you, Miss Hale, whether you admit it or not. Roads and bridges didn't keep their sons alive, she answered. Their men did, their hands. Their winters. A murmur rose behind her, a low, angry sound from men who suddenly saw themselves as figures in someone else's balance sheet. Harrow's smile thinned. Let's make this plain, he said. Mr. Maddox, Mr. Thatcher, your spreads are overextended. Your credit is poor. And the rail route my engineers mapped runs straight through the mouth of this valley. You can cling to your pride until your herds starve and the bank takes everything. Or you can sign over controlling interest to Continental and Frontier. You keep running your outfits for wages. Your men keep working for wages. Miss Hale keeps her hill as a charitable gesture, so long as she stops interfering in business. The dynamite on that dam remains a reminder instead of a weapon. No one important has to die. Those last words landed like a slap. Tamsin heard the wince pass through the riders, every man thinking of a grave with a name that hadn't seemed important at the time. She drew a breath that scraped. You hear him? She called, turning so her voice reached the circle. Billy wasn't important. The hand you lost 2 winters back wasn't important. Your brothers, your sons, they're not men to him, just numbers he's willing to lose to make his ledger neat. Wyatt's weathered face darkened. Ezra's jaw jumped. Hands on rifle stocks tightened. Harrow's gaze cooled another degree. You play well to your audience, he said. But they know the truth. They ride, they rope, they drink their pay away. I build things that last. You build where other men already stand, Tamsin shot back. On land their sweat has already paid for. You want it because they've kept it alive through every dry season and blizzard. Now that it's worth something, you show up with papers and guns and expect them to bow. She glanced at Jonah and Cole, forcing herself not to plead. They had to choose this on their own. He's been making money off you for years, she said. Every time you undercut each other at the railhead, his buyers smile. Every time a fence goes down and cattle go missing, he gets another reason to tell the bank you're a bad risk. He owns Cole's note. He tried to buy Jonah's grief. You going to let him finish what the last 10 winters started? Jonah's boots scraped forward until he stood level with her. The lines around his eyes looked carved with a dull knife. You ever sat up with a calving heifer, Harrow? He called, hands on her flank, praying she makes it through. You ever watched a creek rise in the night and listened for hooves, because you knew if the herd panicked, half of them wouldn't see morning? Harrow's lip curled. I hire men for such tasks, he said. Figures, Jonah replied. This land knows my sweat. Knows Cole's. Knows every man standing behind us. It doesn't know yours. You thought you could buy it before you ever bothered to walk it. He spat into the snow. You won't get my brand on any of your papers. Cole stepped up on Tamsin's other side. He didn't look at Jonah. He looked past Harrow, toward the dam and the faint smudge of smoke above it. You hold my note, he said. Fine, we'll deal with that in town. But you don't hold my hand. You don't hold my boy. You sure as hell don't hold my say over what happens to this valley. You send men to blow my bunkhouse or drown my cattle, and we ain't doing business. We're at war. Tamsin felt something settle between the 3 of them, nothing so neat as friendship, but weighty all the same. They stood shoulder to shoulder, and the brands on their coats seemed suddenly smaller than the stretch of land under their boots. Harrow's eyes flicked to the ridge. A man up there stood near the plunger box, hands resting on it. From this distance, Tamsin could see faint coils of fuse like dark veins against the snow. You think I won't do it, Harrow said quietly. You think I care about your barns and your bunkhouses. I don't. The dam is mine. The rights to this creek will be mine. If you won't sell quiet, I'll wipe out the low ground and start clean. He snapped his fingers. On the ridge, the man at the plunger stomped his boot on something. A heartbeat later, a boom rolled across the valley. The dam shivered. Snow leaped from the rock. A spout of water burst from one side, spraying ice and spray. Men ducked. Horses snorted and danced, eyes rolling. Tamsin's pulse slammed hard enough to make her vision tighten at the edges. Another blast followed a few breaths later, from higher up. A chunk of stone sheared off and splashed into the roiling water below. More spray. The roar of the creek deepened, gained a hungry tone. Stop! Tamsin shouted before she could catch herself. You'll take the whole wall if you keep at it. Harrow watched the wounded dam with clinical interest. Not yet, he said. Those are just on the sluice. A warning. Your winter feed sits on that low ground, doesn't it? Your bunkhouses, your corrals. Picture them floating. Now picture them gone. That's what refusal costs. Cole made a strangled sound. Ben, he rasped. He's in the south bunkhouse. He started forward like a man shot. Tamsin grabbed his sleeve with both hands and dug her heels into the snow. You can't outrun water on foot, she snapped. You know that. He twisted, wild-eyed. I can't stand here while. Then don't stand, she cut in. Move the men who can help him. Her mind raced. drawing the map of the valley she knew down to every crooked fence post. The south bunkhouse sat on a shallow rise, not the lowest ground, but close. Wyatt had men near there, so did Ezra, if they rode now. Wyatt! Ezra! She shouted. Her voice cracked, but it reached them. Take 20 riders between you. Get to the dam and the south bunkhouse. Pull every soul and every horse higher. Cut any fuse you find. If one of Harrow's men reaches for a plunger, you put him in the dirt. Ezra's eyes flicked to Cole. Wyatt looked to Jonah. Neither rancher hesitated. Go, Jonah barked. That's an order. You heard her, Cole added, voice hoarse. Get my boy out. The foremen wheeled their horses. In moments, a knot of riders broke from the circle, pounding toward the narrow trail that led up past the dam. Snow flew from their horses' hooves in white fans. Harrow watched them with faint amusement. You really believe they'll get there in time? He asked. I believe they'd rather die trying than watch you drown their homes, Tamsin said. Her heart felt too big for her chest, full of names she wasn't willing to add to any neat column in his books. He studied her face. You are remarkably stubborn, he said. I have broken harder men than these with less effort. All it ever takes is the right fear. You misjudge the fear here, she replied. It's not of you. It's of failing the people who ride beside them. His gaze sharpened. Enough, he said. He lifted one hand, fingers snapping again. On the ridge, a rifleman shifted, setting his barrel. Tamsin followed the line of that gun and felt her stomach drop. The man was sighting straight at Jonah's chest. There was no time to argue, no time to shout. Her body moved on memory. 100 battlefield moments when hesitation killed. Tamsin threw herself sideways into Jonah. The shot cracked. Fire tore along her upper arm, hot and sudden. She hit the snow hard enough to see a burst of black. The world spun, then righted. Pain chased the spin, bright and searing. Jonah grunted under her, air knocked from his lungs. Cole's shout followed, savage enough to frighten birds from the trees. Men yelled. A few fired back toward the flash on the ridge before Wyatt's distant bellow and Jonah's hoarse command dragged them back from the edge of a full break. Down! Jonah roared. Hold your fire! He dragged Tamsin behind a chunk of half-buried rock. Her shoulder throbbed, warmth seeping under her palm when she pressed it to the torn cloth. Let me see, he demanded. It grazed, she managed. Her fingers came away red but not gushing. Just meat. Cole slid in beside them, face gone the color of old bone. He looked like he wanted to kill something with his bare hands. He aimed for you, Tamsin told Jonah, breath coming short. Don't make that shot worth it by doing something foolish. Jonah's jaw clenched. He nodded once, a short, hard motion, and looked over the rock again. Harrow sat his horse, expression composed but tight around the mouth. He hadn't expected to lose control of the moment. The men behind Jonah and Cole were no longer two separate circles. They were one rough wall, rifles all pointed uphill. You just tried to shoot a man talking to you unarmed, Cole shouted at him. Had to put a bullet through a woman first to do it. Harrow's eyes flicked to Tamsin's blood-smeared sleeve. He shrugged. She moved, he said. That's on her. Rage flared in Tamsin's chest, hot enough to burn through the pain. No, she called. That's on you. And every man here knows it. You promised no one important would die today. You just told them exactly how important you think they are. The riders shifted. Tamsin saw it in the set of shoulders, the way hats tilted, mouths hardened. Whatever thin thread of patience had stuck around snapped. Pain or not, she couldn't waste the break. Listen, she hissed to Jonah and Cole. He rattled the dam and he shot at you. He expects you to break now. We don't. We make him feel outnumbered instead, Jonah frowned. We are outgunned, Tamsin. Not in his head, she said. He's brave with neat numbers. Line up 10 men, he knows what to pay and what to risk. He doesn't like unknowns. We give him those. She swallowed against a wave of queasiness. "Cole, you still carry that old brass horn for roundups?" He blinked. "In my saddlebag. Get it," she said. "Jonah, send a handful of your fastest riders around the ravine trail behind the ridge. They don't have to win a fight. Just fire in the air and shout. Make noise like a second posse closing in. When Cole blows that horn and the shots start behind them and Wyatt hits those charges on the dam, Harrow's men will think the whole territory's closing in. Most of them aren't paid enough to die for his pride." Jonah hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. Pain lined his face when he looked at her arm, but he didn't argue. "6 riders," he called out. He rattled off names without looking back. "Take the ravine trail. No heroics. You fire in the air and make enough noise to wake saints. Then you get back down." Hooves thudded as the chosen men broke away. Cole ran low across the snow, grabbed the horn from his saddle, and slid back behind the rock, breath steaming. The brass caught the pale light, dented but sound. "Say when," he told her. Tamsin listened. The dam's roar deepened, but didn't shift into the low thunder of true failure. Her shoulder burned in time with her heartbeat. Further up, faint as a memory, she heard men shouting, Wyatt and Ezra, if hope could be trusted. Then, from the far side of the ridge, a gunshot cracked. Another. Voices followed, echoing oddly through stone. "Now," she said. Cole raised the horn and blew. 3 long, hard notes ripped through the valley, bouncing off rock and ice. On cue, Jonah's riders on the far side fired again. The echoes made it sound like twice as many. On the dam, a plume of smoke puffed where someone cut a fuse and tossed it. The effect on Harrow's line was instant. Men on the ridge shifted, rifles wavering. One turned full around, squinting toward the ravine. Another slid down behind cover, more interested in saving his own hide than covering his employer. Harrow's head snapped from one disturbance to the other. For the first time, Tamsin saw it, the thin, bright panic under his polish. This had been meant to be a clean demonstration. A few blasts, a few threats, 2 stubborn ranchers humbled. Now riders roared toward his powder. Someone was firing from behind, and a woman he hadn't planned on had turned his stage into a jury. One of his hired guns broke outright, scrambling down the far side of the ridge. Another followed. A third fired a single shot and then ran low along the ledge, dropping his rifle as if it had burned him. "You're losing your grip," Tamsin called, forcing the words through gritted teeth. "You think these men came out today to die for your company name?" As if to answer, a Thatcher hand galloped up from the dam side, horse lathered. Tamsin recognized the crooked hat and 2 big coat one of Cole's younger hands. "Mr. Thatcher," he yelled. "Mr. Maddox," Cole lurched forward. "Ben," he barked. "Up on the rise with the others," the boy shouted, voice ragged. Wyatt cleared the bunkhouse when the first blast hit. "We cut 3 of their fuses. Water's high, but the main wall's holding. We dropped 2 of Harrow's men in the creek, and the rest ran for the trees." Relief hit Tamsin so hard her knees tried to go. She pressed harder on her arm and ground her teeth until the valley stopped tilting. The news ran through the gathered riders like a warm wind. Harrow's biggest stick, the threat of drowning everything they owned, had just snapped in half. He saw it. Tamsin watched the calculation flicker behind his eyes again, faster now, less certain. "You think this changes anything?" he called down. "You've gained yourself a flooded pasture and a wounded nurse. I still hold your notes. I still have engineers and lawyers and time. In the end, that is what wins. Not today," Tamsin answered. "Today you lose the one thing you can't buy, our fear of each other." Jonah stepped up again, snow clinging to his coat. "You heard her," he said. "Whatever comes next, we don't meet you alone anymore. We meet you together." He gestured between his chest and Cole's. "You can drag us into courtrooms and bank parlors, but you want to sit one of us in a corner and play him against the other." Cole nodded, eyes narrow. "You ride back to town. Tell whatever backers you've got that White Elk Valley ain't for sale piecemeal," he said. You want to talk about rail lines and dams and rights, you talk to Maddox, Thatcher, and Hale. Same room, same table. Hearing her name in that list unsettled Tamsin almost as much as Harrow's threats. But she didn't flinch. Harrow let his gaze pass over the three of them. Behind them, 2 outfits worth of riders stood in a ragged armed ring, all rifles pointed outward now instead of at each other. History says alliances like this don't last, he said at last. Men fall out over water, over fences, over women. His eyes lingered on Tamsin just long enough to make the implication oily. When you do, I'll be here. With the law, with the bank, with every tool you don't know how to use. Maybe, Tamsin said. But next time you come, we'll know your tricks. And the boys you shot at today will remember your face. You'll ride past their graves to get to our table. I'll be there to remind you of their names. Something ugly crossed his features, then not remorse, but irritation at the thought of a ledger he couldn't close. He put his hat back on with soft, precise movements. Until next time, then, he said. He wheeled his horse. At a sharp whistle, his remaining men on the ridge began to pull back, some in tidy order, more in hurried, sliding runs. Within minutes they were shrinking figures against the snow, then flecks, then nothing. The sound of their retreating hooves faded. In its place, the valley exhaled. Voices rose as men began to move for real, checking each other for wounds, picking up dropped rifles, turning toward the dam and the low pastures to tally damage. Tamsin's legs finally lost their argument with gravity. The ground tilted. Strong hands caught her, Jonah on one side, Cole on the other. Easy, Jonah said. You're done being a target for one day. I told you, she muttered. It's a graze. And I told you I don't care. Cole shot back, anger and worry braided tight in his voice. You're bleeding on my boots, she snorted despite the pain. They needed color. They half carried, half walked her up the slope toward her cabin. Each step jarred her shoulder. Each jar reminded her she was still very much alive. Behind them, Maddox and Thatcher men streamed in all directions, no longer two sides, just cowboys trying to salvage a wounded winter. Inside the cabin, the familiar smells of stew and wood smoke wrapped around her. The little room felt smaller now, with 2 big ranchers shouldering through the door, but it also felt like shelter in a way it never had. They eased her into a chair at the table. Her hand had gone slick with blood. The adrenaline that had kept her standing drained away, leaving a deep, bone-tired tremble. Water, she said. Clean cloth, whiskey if you've got it. For the wound, not your throats. Waste of perfectly good whiskey, Cole muttered, already reaching for the kettle. Jonah dug in the cupboard where she kept her bottles. You complain now, he said. You'll thank her when that arm doesn't rot off. They worked under her brisk directions. Jonah heating water, Cole tearing strips from an old sheet. Both of them looking far more rattled than she felt now that the worst had passed. Her world narrowed to the cut, the burn of whiskey as they poured it over, the neat prick and pull of the needle as Cole stitched. Straight through, she instructed, jaw clenched. Don't fuss. The skin can complain later. You bossed me in my own kitchen and now in yours, Cole grumbled. One day you'll run the whole valley. Someone has to keep you from doing anything stupid, she said. Bit late for that, Jonah muttered. But there was something like a smile in the corner of his mouth. When they finished, her sleeve was stiff with drying blood and fresh bandage. The pain had settled into a thick, heavy throb instead of a sharp scream. You'll scar, Jonah said. Already got plenty, she replied. One more won't crowd the rest. Outside, wagon wheels crunched and men called to one another. The rhythm had changed, less frantic, more purposeful. The valley had work to do before dark. They'll need you, she said, nodding toward the sound. Both of you. Counting hay, shoring up the dam, figuring which fences we can't fix till spring. They'll manage an hour without us, Jonah answered. We just came from nearly burying you out there. They can stack boards while we make sense of what comes next. Cole leaned his elbows on the table, hat turning in his hands. For once he looked less like the man who chewed nails and more like the boy he must have been once, tired, raw, stubborn. "He'll be back," he said. "Harrow. With lawmen instead of gunmen, with papers instead of powder." "I know," Tamsin said. "But next time he won't be walking into a feud. He'll be walking into a valley that's already chosen its side." She met both their gazes in turn. "That is, if you mean what you said out there." Jonah nodded slowly. "I'm done letting men like him use my temper like a spur," he said. "If I pick a fight now, it'll be one that helps us, not hurts us." Cole grimaced, then gave a short, wry huff. "Reckon I'm done waking up in the night worried more about what Maddox might be doing than what the bank is," he admitted. "There's enough danger outside the valley without inventing more inside it." Tamsin exhaled. "Then we start with truth," she said. "You bring every note, every deed, every rotten little side deal you've made over the years to this table. We lay them out. We decide together where you can bend and where you can't. We don't give Harrow dark corners to work in." "That's a tall order," Jonah murmured. "So was standing in front of your rifle this morning," she said. "Still did it." Cole shook his head. "You going to be a thorn in our hides till we re-old and gray, aren't you?" "If you live that long," she replied. "Which is the point." A small, shy knock sounded at the door. Jonah moved aside as it opened. Ben Thatcher stood in the entry, hair wild, mud spattered up to his knees, eyes too big in his narrow face. "Miss Hale," he blurted. "Pa said you got shot." "Your pa exaggerates," she said. "Bullet just kissed me. He stitched me up himself. You can check the work if you like." Ben's gaze darted to the bandage, then to his father, then back. "You stepped in front of him," he said slowly. "Why would you do that?" The real answers crowded her throat. Because she watched too many boys grieve fathers, because she promised herself nobody else died in this valley, because of pride, if she could help it, because Ben's boots had sat on her porch too many mornings waiting for bread. She gave him the simplest one. "Because he's got work left to do," she said. "Same as you. And because I'm tired of burying people before they're finished." Ben seemed to weigh that. "You're crazy," he decided. Tamsin barked a laugh that made her shoulder twinge. "So I've been told." He stepped forward and, awkward as a colt, hugged her good side. "Thank you," he mumbled, so low she almost didn't hear. When he straightened, he turned on his father. "You going to fight Mr. Maddox again?" he demanded. Cole opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Jonah, then at Tamsin. "We're still going to argue," he said at last.